My name is Jason S.C. Fung, and this is Vanilla Club Podcast. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Mike Jones of Resilient Tomorrow. Resilient Tomorrow is a must-read Substack. I first encountered it with Mike's game-changing article, Convenience is the Cage: Why Redefining Wealth is the First Step to Freedom. Mike Jones is someone who was very much a part of the system, someone who's worked in Silicon Valley, in games, building scaled systems for mass consumption. He is the founder of a tool library called Neighborhood Share, which is a free app currently only available to US residents, wherein users can list their tools, describe them, attach photos, and other users in the local area can apply to use those tools 100% complimentary. In the episode, he talks about the extractive system. Mike is an engaging and very multifaceted speaker. We hope you enjoy. Indigenous Voices Matter. Mike.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
Excellent. Great to see you. Thank you so much for taking some time and coming on with us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, your show, how you got started?
I'd love to. So I'll just say a little bit of personal background about myself. I have an American mother and a Hong Kong father. I grew up almost exactly half in terms of California and also in Hong Kong. So I come from a multicultural background, multinational multicultural background. I ended up marrying an Australian, and we are very happily settled in Australia.
Yeah.
I have, as part of what I do professionally, an organic vanilla plantation in the northeast corner of Australia. If you're familiar with Queensland, it's about 2.5 times the size of Texas. So to get some of the scale, I mean, people say like, can I drive from Brisbane to Cairns? I'm like, yeah, if you have 19 hours, right? It's a very large state. So we are basically in the tropical 1% tip of Queensland, 45 minutes away from the most biodiverse area in the entire country. And Australia is, again, the size of the lower 48. So that says a little bit of something about the scale, ecologically that we've got there. And anyhow, we operate a couple Airbnbs that became an Airbnb plus a food forest, which then became a organic vanilla plantation, which then has now become a organic papaya plantation, in addition to beekeeping and so on. So we're growing our food resiliency, if you will, right? To borrow some of your phraseology, in addition to combining that with what we would probably call regenerative hospitality. So we're on the cusp, on the sort of borderlands of some of the things that you talk about, albeit we're doing it from we're sort of tweeners between the old capitalist model and some of the new models that you're talking about and that you have so eloquently discussed on their Substack.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about already. I think you're in the perfect place, right? One, I mean, you're actually many steps ahead of a lot of people, including myself, right? Like just with a lot of the things you're doing already. And I think the whole idea of what I'm really trying to write about is that we have to envision what a new future looks like because we've all been raised with this idea of what success looks like, what it looks like to be wealthy, what it looks like to be well off and well established, right? And I think that without having that a new narrative established, basically, that gives us something to look forward to, it's difficult to make that transition, right? And the whole reason I started my Substack was because my feed was filled with people diagnosing the problem, right? And any kind of suggestions for how to fix it just seemed so out of reach, right? Like it was just such a big step from where I was today. I was like, well, there's got to be like an in-between way. There's got to be a way to make this happen. And so that's really where I'm at now, is I'm trying to define for people, like I'm calling it an off-ramp. How we're on this system right now. It's like a freeway. It's like a multi-lane highway, and you're cruising along at high speed and you're like, where are we even going? Right. And so maybe it's time to find a different destination, take the off-ramp and experiment with some other ways to figure out where, at least look at a map, and figure out where we're headed. And so that's really what my Substack's all about, is trying to give people a place to start. And so like where you're at is like perfect. It's perfect. It's great suggestions, right? Like this is what we're doing. This is how we can help. We can identify what's worked for us. And the thing about it is it's so it's going to be so different for everyone in every community, that what works for you isn't necessarily going to work for me in San Jose, California.
Yeah, right? That's right.
But what's important is to recognize that there are people trying out other things. And if you are trying out something, there are people who are going to be in a region, if not your region, a similar region to what you've done, who can go, oh, that sparks some ideas. And maybe I could try something like that. And that's really what I really am trying to create more of I want to see a community happen. I want to see people like connecting and going, oh, okay, this is what I can do because I've seen somebody else who's tried something similar. And, it's also really interesting, the fact that you grew up in California and have had, in 2009, I interviewed for a job in Brisbane. And
right.
Yeah, I spent two weeks there interviewing and just hanging out and getting to know the place. Made it to the Gold Coast for a little bit. Didn't make it up as far north as you are, it sounds like. But, and then the housing market crashed. That was the whole reason I was interviewing in Australia. I thought, well, this would be a great opportunity just to move. I got offered the job, came home, sold all my stuff, was getting ready to move. And then a week before I was supposed to move, they called and told me that the job offer was being rescinded because essentially the crash hit Australia. And then, and so all of a sudden I was like, oh, I don't have any stuff. And I'm kind of, luckily, this job showed up a couple weeks later in California. And so that's what brought me to California. But in another timeline, I'm probably also married to an Australian living in the.
All right. In another timeline.
Yeah.
We're talking about parallel communities, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Parallel universes, I guess.
Yeah.
So you're originally from back east?
I grew up in the Northwest.
Right.
Yeah, Washington State. So I grew up in Olympia, Washington, and went to school at the University of Washington.
Huskies.
Started working in software. I working at a flight simulator company.
Wow.
And then from there, I moved into video games. And I spent a large part of my career working in the gaming industry. But in 2016, I stepped out of that and actually stepped back into it and started my own video gaming business, working on specifically Web3, which was 2016, super early for Web3, but I thought we'd be setting up a cornerstone for what I was thinking of as a metaverse before Meta stole the whole name and idea of what it was. And what I wanted to provide through that using Web3 was, having spent so long in the games industry, what I recognized were that the people who were doing all the work were essentially the ones who were not really reaping any benefits. So, when you're creating video games, like a AAA publisher, or a AAA game is usually published by a publisher like Microsoft or EA or any number of other publishers. And they're putting millions of dollars in this product. They hire hundreds of people. These people come and they, basically you hire them, you tell them to work 60 to 80 hours a week to crunched to get this game done and under a timeline. And then at the end of that period, there's a big layoff that typically happens because the game's done. We don't have anything for anybody, and there's no reward for the people who just busted their butt, for a year and a half to build this thing. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to be able to take Web3 and through contracts be able to give the people who are building the things, whether it's the art or the code that underlies everything, or the worlds or the characters, and every time there's a transaction made on those things, or every time they're resold or reused, that person who helped build it or the team that helped build it actually gets a residual on that payment. So what I wanted to do was kind of flip the script and on who was at the top of the food chain for getting paid, and making sure that the people who were doing the work, the teams that were doing the work, were actually seeing the rewards. That was just one aspect of it. But again, it's 2016, really early. But anyway, that's another side point. It's been a long road.
Yeah. It's been a long road.
Yeah.
Well, we will definitely harken back to some of your bio and your story. But I mean, I'm so I've been binging on some of your Substack, and one of the references that you made to, I'm probably mispronouncing his title, Anar Casper, but he's got that sort of epic 40-part series that you link to. I think I'm about 4 or 5 parts in, but he begins, I think, in 2022, sort of laying out the hypothesis. Maybe we can just start by talking a little bit about the theory, and talking a little bit about the sort of, mental architecture, to begin with. And it seems like there's not a lot of daylight between yourself and Anar Casper in terms of the problem statement. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. And what's interesting about this is again, how I started my Substack was I just looked at it and was like, no one's really offering solutions. And so I didn't actually go out and do any research. I didn't spend any time looking at other people's writing. I literally just sat down and said, what do I think the problem is? Mm-hmm. And coming out of my background that we were just talking about, with this having a career that was about building things, the primary aspect of my job was to create teams and create space for those teams to be successful, identify the problems we were going to run into before we ran into them, understand where there were gaps in our processing, where we were falling, where we were missing things, and fix all those things, and make sure that in fixing those things, I wasn't creating more problems. And that really led me down. I didn't realize this at the time, but now I know that it's called systems thinking. It's like looking at the entire system, seeing how it works, identifying where the problems are, looking at the inputs and the outputs, and how do things flow through that. And once I learned that framework, I was like, oh, okay, wow, this is great. This is something I've already been doing. I'm going to start applying this. And so I did the same thing with just looking at how we live as a society and identifying where are the problem points, where are the things that can go wrong, what are the problems that we can run into. And from that, I said, well, I think there are 7 different areas that I see as being problematic. The very first one is food. Our food supply is very dependent upon a fragile system. It's dependent upon, like here in the United States, I think the quote I hear all the time is that grocery stores have a max of 3 days worth of food. And we saw during COVID and during, whenever there's a big problem, people know about it. Like we see a run on the grocery stores, things are gone. It's hard to get hold of them. Our supply chain is actually pretty weak. Even for as resilient as it is in normal times, minor stresses really create problems. Because everybody's moved to what's called a just-in-time delivery system. So food is the first one. Again, how I started looking at it was, given the state of everything in the world, what would happen, if there were any kind of problems? Where would the areas be that I would find myself just really struggling, you know? And I don't want to sound like a prepper. I'm not a prepper, but I do think that I like to be prepared, if that makes sense, right? And so I'm not preaching doom and gloom, and I'm not preaching like, my biggest thing about preppers is they are very individualistic. I had a friend at a job I had a long time ago who was a prepper, and he said to me one day, he's like, if, and this is how they talk about it, if the shit goes down and you show up at my doorstep and you're asking me for food or for a gun or for anything like that, I'm going to give you a butter knife and tell you to go get it yourself. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, well, I understand that, but that seems like a pretty crappy way to live, right? Like, that's not the way I want to spend my life. And so coming back to that, food being one of the weak spots, another weak spot being electricity, power. I like my lifestyle. I like I like being able to talk to somebody on the other side of the world. So what do I need to keep that running? I need electricity. Well, that turns out to be a pretty fragile system also. Especially whether you're in California or Texas or anywhere in the United States, our grid is already getting weak. It has problems. Additionally, in a lot of ways, it's a very extractive system. It is not designed to actually, it provides the power we need, but it is not designed in a way that is actually beneficial, right? Like, it's meant to be difficult. And anyway, so power is one of them. The next one I actually look at, I thought it was money. I'm like, okay, well, if something happens and I lose access to money, how are we going to do things? Like, how would it work? And from that actually came a well, what if money isn't really money, but money is wealth? And what is wealth? Wealth is, the reason people want money is they want access to things. They want what money can provide access to. It's not really about the money itself. It's money as a tool. As like, well, there's other ways to get access to things. So if I have access to things, that's really what's more important than money. From there, I kind of broke it down a little bit further and was like, well, that really, what all those things really rely on is if I had a community, if I had people I knew I could count on around me, I wouldn't have to worry about those things as much, right? And then that would also change how wealthy I am, right? Like, if I had a community of people I knew I could count on, that works. So that's the first four, or community. And then following that is knowledge, right? You got to know how to do things. You got to have access to, and people who know how to do things. And if you don't have that, that's also a fragile system that we have right now. Most of our knowledge comes from people who go to school. Things are shifting now. We have, like, you can even just go up to YouTube. That's what I do to learn most everything nowadays. But at the same time, what if I lose access to YouTube, right? How is now knowledge going to be transferred now? So that's another system I think is kind of fragile. Moving from knowledge is, we talked about community. Let's see what we got. I'm missing one. I got two more, I think. Yeah. Well, one of them is narrative, which is usually what I leave for the last one. Community is also belonging, right? Like, having a sense of I belong to somewhere. The next big one is communication. Your ability to actually have communication that's not just, even if it's just the people on your street, if the power goes out, like, how do you communicate things to, even locally, right? How do you make that communication happen? And then the last one is narrative. And narrative is one I recently stumbled on, and I've really added, and I'm leaning into more heavily now, because I realize narrative is so important. It was like the very first thing we're talking about. It's the stories that set our path, right? If we don't have a vision of what can be, and also the narrative, the story about why we are doing things, it's hard to have that motivation to continue doing it. So all that to say, that's a very long way to say that I stumbled across that myself, right? Like, I was like, oh, here's the framework I've come up with. And I thought, once I figured this out, I'm like, okay, well, let's start looking at how to answer these different questions. Like, how do we take care of food? And I'm like, well, food is great. My wife and I already have a garden. We live on a small plot of land in San Jose. We have a garden. So this year we were like, okay, well, things are not going the way we think they should. Maybe we should just overplant our garden this year. Like, it's not that much more, and we can create a lot more out of that. And so there are steps, individual things you can do. And I started coming up with each of these things on my own. And then about a month, maybe 2 months ago, I stumbled across Anna Casper. And as soon as I started reading his stuff, I reached out to him and was like, hey, I would really love to collaborate with you in any kind of way. Like, we're really on the same page. And I feel like he has put a lot more, how should I put this? I'm coming at this from a very hands-on perspective. Like, these are just the things that I'm figuring out on my own. My next series that I want to do on Substack is actually, I want to create a video series of showing people how I am doing each of these things. I'm practicing what I preach, right? And these are the steps I took, and this is how I figured it out. And because I really think at this point in our society, and you're a perfect example of this, it's just about the people who are a step or two ahead, sharing that knowledge with the people who are curious and coming right behind them. And then it's just always going to be that way. Like, and so you'll always be a couple steps ahead of the people who you're teaching. They'll always be a couple steps ahead of the people they're teaching. But what that does is it creates a system of people who can work together to actually share knowledge, which is one of the things we were just talking about. So back to Anna Casper, I think it's really Anarchasper. I'm not sure how he pronounces it. I've never actually asked him. But I stumbled across this stuff and I'm like, I feel like it's very academic. I feel like he has studied it, like, and he knows it backwards and forwards. Whereas I am just trying to apply it from a very practical standpoint. And I think that comes across in our writing too. Like, I think that his writing is very knowledge based, right? And I think whereas I'm kind of like, hey, this is what I'm doing. If you're interested, like, I would love to have you along with me. Let's try this out. So yeah, and from that, the thing that I've done recently is, like, I'm building a GPT that will allow people to come to the GPT, answer a few questions, talk about who they are, what their interests are, what areas they're interested in addressing in their life, what their monthly disposable income is for this kind of a thing, how much time they want to spend it on every week. And from there, we'll start providing them an off-ramp. Like, here are things that you can start trying tomorrow to do this. And what I've discovered through my Substack is that there's a lot of interest in this area, but I think that after reading about it, it's hard to maintain momentum, right? You read it and you're like, oh, that sounds great. I love these ideas. And then you go back to work and you go to the grocery store and you do the things you watch Netflix, right? So I thought if I could create a GPT with a dashboard that would give you a reminder on a regular basis and prompt you to, like, come back and check in about how you're doing, it would give people a place to start and give them some motivation to keep going. Yeah. So I want to say that dashboard, that GPT, draws a lot from not just my work, but also from his.
Yeah. You mentioned that in the article too.
Yeah.
No, thank you for that. There's so much to unpack there. But before we dig in a little bit, I just wanted to ask you, so from 2016 to present, was there, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that's happened in the last 6 months. You could look at any number of metrics, the number of passports issued, in the last 6 months by people worried that, there's going to be delays from the State Department in renewing their passport. Were there any other sort of moments in that decade, that sort of prompted you to have a rethink?
I think that's an excellent question. There have been so many things that have happened in my life that have made me constantly question the way that we do things. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a very Christian background. Like, my mom just really wanted to make sure that we had that established. And I just even remember being like 7 and 8 years old, going to, like, Sunday school and going to, like, church and just being like, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand, like, you're telling me all this stuff, but then I watch the way we act and what we do on a day-to-day basis, and it doesn't feel like it fits, right? It doesn't seem like we're, well, practicing what we preach. And so that was something that really, so even from a really young age, right? Like, that was always something where I've always been, I don't know, this just seems weird. But over the past 10 years specifically, I realized, when I moved to California, I started working at startups, like a lot of startups. And I started my own business on a couple occasions. And in retrospect, I recognize that I was always looking for big investment, big reward. And that reward to me looked like a big payout. And specifically, I wanted to make enough money that I could purchase a plot of land up in the mountains somewhere, that I could build a retreat center on it, that I could invite a bunch of my friends up there to live and build kind of a communal space. I've done a lot of big art. I was involved in 2012. I got involved in Burning Man and built an art car that became iconic and was actually on the poster and the ticket for 2022. And so it was, that changed my life a lot. Made me realize that I could do anything I really put my mind to. So that's what also ultimately led me to starting businesses, right? Starting my own businesses. In there in 2016, I also started a flotation center, a sensory deprivation tanks. And that was the way I opened that up in Silicon Valley, thinking, this will be my way to give back to people, because if there's anybody who needs their a system reset, it's people who are just grinding every day and trying to, make the next big thing happen. And as I was coming out of that period, I kind of entered into what I've heard referenced as a long, dark night of the soul. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't getting what I really wanted out of life. I was pursuing this dream and it wasn't really paying off the way I thought it would. And I think that there are a lot of people coming to that recognition or that awareness, and especially in these generations, that are coming up, right? That the ideas that we've been kind of sold on are not necessarily that great. And it's nice to have nice things and it's nice to do nice things, but what's the cost of that? And so that was a big part of it. And I've always just had this, I want to help people. And that was another thing I discovered. Like, I've been working at a lot of startups, and I'd go and interview with these companies and I'd be like, wow, these sound like they're really in alignment. They sound like they're trying to deliver what I think is a great product that people actually need. Will do wonderful things for people, will help, isn't necessary. And then we get into it, and after we'd have a pivot or two, and suddenly I'm like, now we're just kind of building a product for the sake of building a product. We're just building a thing to be a thing that we want to convince people that they need, so that we can get paid for it. And especially coming out of the games industry, there was a lot of that. And there were multiple times in my career through building video games where I was like, is this really making the world a better place? Am I really serving the world doing this?
Don't take my power wash mechanic away from me, though.
Yeah, right. Right.
I'm saying, but we have these guilty pleasures, though. I mean, I'm sitting there looking through my Steam store, and I'm thinking, yeah, you can tell the quality of some of these games, and then there's some that fit into the mold that precisely what you're talking about. Like, wow, like who okayed, who greenlit this game?
Right. And that's every game starts off with the idea of it being the greatest thing ever. Right. And then money, and the idea, and the desire to have a return on the investment, and like, what is it we can really pull off, and the amount of time that we have. And so you wind up giving away a lot of things. But I think the worst of it was, I don't want to speak bad of it, but it was a horrible time, was when I moved to California. I've always been kind of like on the cusp of what's up and coming. Like I just always seem to be maybe even not even just before early adopters. Right. And that, like, even like I say, starting a Web3 company in 2016, like I was like, this is going to be the next big thing. It's taken 9 years. I think it'll take another year and we'll actually start seeing Web3 catch on. But so I was too early on that one. But when I moved to California, I was working at a company that made Facebook games. And this was right after like Farmville hit it really big, and we were producing a lot of games like that. And it was just, everything about it just felt, for lack of a better word, to me, in my personal feeling, it felt dirty, right? I felt we were going and stealing other people's IP. We were looking, just copying exactly what they had done. We weren't doing anything new. We were just trying to push out as much content as we could, as quickly as we could, creating as much social virality as possible, and trying to literally hook people with gambling mechanics. So trying to hit that dopamine button. And it made a lot of money, and I didn't like it. And so that also led to me not being a really good fit at those companies, simply because like I just didn't feel good about it, and I didn't have a really good way to vocalize that at the time. And so that was like 15 years ago. So I mean, that's happened to me since then. And so all along, it's been one of those things where I'm just kind of like, where can we be doing, how do I put this? How can I be identifying the gaps and the fragile systems that I have in my own life and repairing those things? It's the same exact thing that I'm now applying to identifying those externally. I started doing that internally. And about 20, probably right around the time COVID started, that resulted in our flotation center having to close, because we couldn't have people sitting in a little enclosed space floating in water, breathing in and out, and then have them exit and 15-20 minutes later have somebody else get in. Our local authorities said that was okay, but we were like, we don't know if it's actually okay, so we don't really feel good doing it, right? So we wound up, after about 6 or 8 months, we wound up closing. So that hit pretty hard. And then at the same time, my mom passed away. And the day after my mom passed away, I was laid off from the company that I was working at. And so when that happened, I now call it, I'm unintentionally retired. And I spent about a year looking really hard for a job, and seeing, again, same thing, working in Silicon Valley. I just kept interviewing at all these companies going, I just don't feel like I'm a good fit for what you're doing. And so it just wasn't working out. So about a year and a half ago, that's when I started doing this work, and started sitting down and going, okay, well, what are the systems within myself that I need to start addressing? And once I started working on that, it started becoming more evident what was going on around me and how to start addressing those systems, if that makes sense. So that's where this work started coming out of. Long way to answer your question.
That totally makes sense. I mean, it makes sense, and maybe just like in the spirit of a conversation, let me just offer you a little bit of my thinking, just to bounce off on some of the sort of 7 points that you made. We did an interview with a fellow Substacker who, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Honest Sorcerer. That episode's coming out. It's forthcoming. But that was a pretty heavy one, and we got into some heavy topics. If anyone's familiar with his work, he doesn't pull any punches about the poly crisis, to use his term. I guess for me, I'm not a science guy. I'm not a sort of environmentalist, sort of climate change type of guy per se. But I'm really concerned about where things are headed in multiple directions. And I've got my own framework that I've developed. And it's just three. It's three elements. And I tried to be as pithy as possible, and I'll just share them with you. I've never shared them outside of my own little Apple Notes. But it's a feeling of bewilderment that arises from a lack of sincerity, a lack of human scale, and a lack of serendipity. These are three elements that frame what I consider this sort of bewilderment. And I'm speaking specifically from a city perspective, right? Even though I interact with a lot of sort of country people, where we are, they think I'm crazy, right? Because I talk about things that make a lot more sense in the city, but I'm a displaced city person. And I think about sincerity, and I think about the lack of it. It's one of those things where the system, right? To talk about, your sort of like imagination heist, the last article that you published, it's sort of like we as a society don't have the imagination to suppress the desire to be cynical. We're so entrenched in cynicism, right? That we can't even imagine a world outside of it. It's just even the suggestion of sincerity, right? From a city perspective, from a sophisticated perspective, it sounds so awkward. Number two, scale. I think that, you're in Silicon Valley, right? If there's one word that defines Silicon Valley, it's scale. The first VC conversation you'll have with anyone is, does it scale? Can it scale? How does it scale? Am I correct? It's the number one foundational question that drives any and all investment. It's the fundamental driver. It's this idea of like, I call up customer support, and then I get this voice that it sounds friendly and just this, and I'm like, oh wow, this is a real person, everything like this. Then 10 seconds later, I'm like, oh, I asked this question, and then you're going by a script. Wait a second, we're in the uncanny valley here. We're now so trained to mimic this like human scale, but in fact, it actually just reveals that we're so far from it. And I think that one of the driving factors for what we're doing at Vanilla Club is really to recreate human scale. And we can talk a lot, talk more about that. And then the third thing, if I can just offer that, is serendipity. Is that, we plan a trip now. When I listen to people, I'm old enough, we're probably close in age. Like I remember like the idea of backpacking. There was an idea that like you would go on the road and you would, like, the whole point was to meet interesting people, to like stumble onto something.
Right.
But the way that people travel now, and it's not just young people, it's like, okay, go on a TripAdvisor. Does it have 4.6 stars or above? Filter, boom, 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 boom. Now people are planning their itineraries with AI. And I'm thinking to myself, this is insane. The whole point of travel, this is the definition of travel as opposed to tourism, right? Is to put yourself in, obviously envelope safe situations. You're not going to go into a favela and like try to pick a fight with someone and do something stupid, but you're trying to put yourself slightly outside of your comfort zone, trying new food, meeting new people, experience a different culture. I thought that was the whole point. I mean, this is what I thought was the premise, but apparently that's not the case. Serendipity is no longer a value that we share, even though for humans, I think that we need play. It's so fundamental to what we do. We crave it. It should be part of our daily interactions. Like look at how any child, I have 2 kids. They intuitively go and they test something or they try something and they tinker with it. It's not just paint by numbers. So what we're trying to do is, and we don't have all the answers, and that's why it's so invigorating talking to you, right? Because I launched this thing just sort of without having that VC conversation. I don't know if this thing scales, right? But I know that there's a huge amount of bewilderment, and people have a need to find a salve for some of these things. So that's just a little bit of background about me. This show is about you, though, but I wanted to give you a little bit just to help fill in, who you're talking to and what my sort of platform is.
Yeah, but I think that the best show is probably a really honest conversation. There's definite crossover in what we're talking about. We're all trying to find our way, like you were saying with play, especially when I started that gaming company in 2016, one of the premises that we had is that we wanted to teach people something with our game experience. And that was because we knew that people learn best through play. Like, that is the best way you can teach somebody something. And essentially our company was called 8 Circuit Studios, and the whole idea being there, it was based off of he wrote Prometheus Rising. Matter of fact, in the book Prometheus Rising, the author will come to me in just a second, he talks about there's 8 different stages of awakening, and that was there are 8 different circuits is what he called them in humanity. And that was what we were basing the name of for our company from. And the whole idea of our business was we wanted to create stories that would actually get people to think, right, and really connect with them and get them to think more about these things that we are talking about, right? Like, how do you actually start unlocking this in yourself and creating this new future? That was a big part of our business model. So you're absolutely right. And we used to, matter of fact, that was on our slide deck, right? That people learn best through play. All kinds of studies to support that. So yeah, I think you're right. You're right on. And you're right. I think about, when we talk about traveling too, I remember the first time I went to Europe, like I went with a buddy, and all we had was our itinerary was literally, this is where we land on this day, and this is what day we have to catch our train to our next location. And
that's the way it should be.
Yeah, we didn't know where we were staying. We just knew we'd figure it out. And so whenever we'd get someplace, we'd ask people, like, hey, we're just in town looking for this. We're gonna be here for a few days. We have an idea what neighborhoods we should stay in, but then we'd ask for suggestions. And we always found a place. So it worked out, and that was exactly right. Like, we'd move around trying to find people to interact with, and like you said, I think the biggest thing with travel is, to me, the difference between travel and tourism is you're trying to learn something about the other culture. And I have a good friend, he was an expat for a while and lived in and you're probably familiar with this. He lived in Costa Rica, and he said it would blow him away that what he wound up doing was a lot of work for Americans who were in part of the expat community, and a lot of the work that he wound up doing was actually finding them local labor to help them do stuff. And the reason why is because they weren't willing to learn Spanish or to really interact with the locals. They essentially took the United States, moved it to Costa Rica, and had their own little enclave of people that they interacted with, and that was their group, right? Without actually interacting with the local culture at all. And so, when he explained that to me, he was like, I was blown away that was how people were living in another country, right? With no real understanding of what the culture is like in the country that they're living in. So yeah, I think you're right on with the idea about serendipity and travel and, pulling all that together.
Well, that example that you talk about with Costa Rica, that is probably part and parcel of the same thinking behind the butter knife example, right? Whereby I think when you come from a big country like the United States, a powerful country, you are accustomed to a certain wealth, as you'd say, in that capitalist definition. It's, why do you need community? You don't. It's not a necessity. It's a sort of like thing. It's just it's not. I mean, I think that when you're from a different background, you might be tempted to look at it slightly differently. It's not something you can evade. The responsibilities, the reciprocal nature of certain transactions are just kind of accepted to be, they're assumed, whereas if you are accustomed to having the chips, well, you could play that game, or you always have that option to just come over the top of someone.
I think the word you used is perfect too, which is transaction, right? And I think that's one of the things that, to talk about the work that I'm trying to do is, again, when we're talking about money versus wealth and what wealth actually is in our society, specifically in the United States, everything is transactional, and that's because it comes down to what are you going to pay to get something. And it's something I've even recognized with trying to launch some of these platforms that I'm building. A lot of the things I offer are free, and I've recognized that I think that there's actually an aversion to that, because what kind of value can it have if you're not charging me for it? Right? Like, so everybody's so used to living in this transactional system, they don't even know how to exist outside of it. And so then you do something like go to Costa Rica, right, where wealth isn't about money, and the community there understands that, the people who live there, the locals. And then you have people come in who don't understand that and are trying to transact with every exchange that they make. And it's going to be a culture clash. And that's one of those things that I'm trying to identify ways that in creating, like I've been calling it, this off-ramp, how can I help people come to understand that, right? How can we make this shift, and what are easy ways to help people down that path? And so that's some of the stuff that I've got in my pocket for down the road. When I start expanding these platforms that I'm working on, and we'll see if it works or not. I think it'll be an interesting experiment, like, put it that way.
Definitely. Well, tell us about Neighborhood Share.
Yeah, so Neighborhood Share, that's great transition, is basically what I was talking about. Neighborhood Share right now is a tool sharing application that's in beta. It's in the United States right now only, and realistically it's only in my neighborhood at the moment, but I just opened it up for beta for anybody else in the United States who is got 3 or 4 friends and really willing to kind of drive where it's, getting it started. And so now let me explain what it is, now that I've put all that out there. It is a tool sharing platform. So essentially you log in, you open it up. If you have tools you want to share, I actually happen to have a whole bunch of them behind me. We're working in my workshop right now. You take a picture of it with your phone, and then you upload that picture. The AI will identify the tool that it is you just took a picture of. It will categorize it, give it all the details. You just need to double check, make sure everything's okay. You hit submit, and it is now in the database for somebody in your local neighborhood, and you define the size of that. I'm assuming your local neighborhood is probably a lot bigger than my local neighborhood. So, my local area, I don't go more than 2 miles from my house for pretty much anything. So if I do, it's kind of a trip, right? My guess is your neighbors are probably further away than that, so I let you define that, how big your neighborhood is. And then someone else in your neighborhood can come online. I don't know, want to borrow a pressure washer. Maybe they need to borrow a sewing machine. Maybe they need to borrow whatever it is. That I have so many tools that spend 99.9% of their time just sitting around, that it would be effective if somebody else could use it. It would actually, the thing would be doing what it's supposed to be doing. So they can come online, they can do a search for it. They find you in that list. They can click, I would like to borrow this. They tell you the dates that they would like to borrow it. You get a message, you get a request for it, both email and SMS, or whichever way you want to get it. You can approve or deny it. Doesn't matter, right? It's up to you. Once you set something up, that person, then you arrange for time for them to come pick it up, and they borrow it. Then when they borrow it, you check it out, they check it out, so you both do it. And what that does is then the system knows where your tool is. So I don't know if you've ever loaned something to somebody and 6 months later gone, where is my thing? I know I gave it to somebody. Now the system knows who has it. When the date that they said they would return it is approaching, it will contact them and let them know, hey, your date's coming up on your tool, or how's it going, right? Basically just gentle nudge. And after the date has expired, it will just start pestering them. You need to return this tool. And both of you will get that message. You'll get a reminder that they have it. They'll get a message saying that they need to return it. And then that way it actually makes its way back to you. The idea being that I think, I don't know how things are in Australia, but in the United States, I think that we're going to be coming up on some tough times in the next few years. And I would like people to feel like they don't have to spend quite so much money. And that, again, instead of looking at money as wealth, the number of dollars in their bank account, they can look at their community that's around them and see that they have what they need. In addition to that, I think it creates a stronger community because, naturally, if you have a project going on that you need to borrow something, we're probably going to talk about that project when you come over to borrow the tool and I show you how to use it, or I give you some information about it, or, whatever our exchange is, we're going to know each other now. And in addition to that, we're going to know something about each other and have at least some kind of top level conversation that we can now relate to the next time we see each other. And that's the big thing. I want it to help build community. I've gotten feedback from people that and this is what I was talking about with the whole transaction thing. They're like, I'd feel better if I could charge people money for it. If I could charge people like $5 to borrow my thing. I'm kind of like, you okay? I mean, I understand. And I don't want to say no to that request. But in the short term, it's not really meeting what I'm trying to create with this. So that's what I'm saying. I think I have some ideas for down the road a little bit, how I can get people used to this idea of interacting with people in our community without actually having to exchange dollars. And I think there's going to be a lot of gamification that goes into it, like how we share things. And, there are other concerns people have. Like, I mean, I understand if you don't live in a great neighborhood, maybe this isn't the right thing for you, right? But ultimately, I think even people who don't live in great neighborhoods, if they knew their neighbors and were interacting more often, they probably would have a better neighborhood. I can't speak for everybody. Like I said, what works for one community isn't necessarily going to work for all of them. This is just my first foray into what I think will work for my community, and I would like to offer to other communities. So yeah, that's really the basis of the tool right now. Short term, the features I'd like to add to it, like I said, I overplanted my garden this year. I would love to. My wife and I are pretty active on Facebook for it's called a Buy Nothing group, where basically you give away stuff and you just post on it and say, hey, I have this, anybody want it? And people will come get it. And that's, again, for a local neighborhood. The thing I don't like about it is it's Facebook is number one. And I don't really use Facebook, so it's hard for me to see things there that are, it's hard for me to keep track of that. And then the only time I use it is to give something away. And then I'll post the thing and I won't get the notifications that people are interested in it. And if I forget to look, anyways. So we overplanted our garden. What I'd like to do is be able to put on there like who has what in their garden, and be able to create like a local garden exchange, if you will. Right? Like, I'm looking for cucumbers. Anybody got any extra cucumbers? Because I can tell you right now, I have more zucchini than I know what to do with, and if I could find a way to find people in my neighborhood who would really, right now I'm giving it away to people, my neighbors, and I'm not really sure if they appreciate it or not, or if now I've just become the guy who's giving away zucchinis. So if I could find people who want it, if that I feel like this would be a great way to do it. I want to put in there basically a seed exchange. So at the end of the season, like, everybody who's done planting can identify what plants they would like to share. I'd also like it to be a where you can identify who's growing what in their gardens, and so we're not all duplicating work, right? Like, if my neighbor has tomatoes, I don't need to grow tomatoes if they're going to have a ton of extra tomatoes. So that's kind of, a little bit of, I'd like to see it go there with like garden share, we'll call it. The next step from there is from tools. Like, we also have 2 young kids, and I don't know how much childcare costs in your area. My guess is you don't have family nearby who can just drop in and help take care of them. We don't. And so currently we're paying $40 an hour for someone to watch our kids. I would love if I could use my platform to identify skill sharing. One, like who's doing babysitting, you want to come through, can we exchange anything to do that? In addition to that, people who have skills that they want to share with people, be able to set up their own like classes or exchanges. Like, I know how to do bike maintenance. I'd be willing to teach you if I can get some of those zucchinis, something like that, right? So becoming a platform by which people who have things in the neighborhood can start sharing their knowledge, the stuff that they have, their skills and abilities, and teaching other people also in that process. And again, like I said, I have a plan for how to manage the exchange for time for things, but that's down the road a little bit.
So you mentioned the tough times. Does it matter? Because I can see there's something appealing about this, even in good times, right? There's elements of what you're talking about that, in a sense, if you were, making the next SimCity and you were imagining a utopia, the sort of social dynamics that that are underpinning this app, would really make a lot of sense. So I guess my question is, does the nature of the bad times, what shape it takes, whether it's more political or ecological, does that matter?
I don't think so. And I think, like you're even saying, even in good times, this would be something that I think would be appealing to a lot of people. When I talk to some of my neighbors about them, they're like, I'd love that. I think that I want to open this up for beta, but what it really requires is like anywhere between like 5 and 20 people initially who are willing to quote unquote seed it, right? Like if I open it up, what I've noticed is people join, but then they'll never come back because they're the only person on it. And so I need some people who are in their local area who are dedicated to actually saying, hey, yes, I'll take a picture of a tool or 5 or 10 or 25, to help just get some tools in here to start with. And I have 5 other friends who are willing to do the same thing. And we're willing to canvass the neighborhood and let other people know that this exists and that we're trying to build a thing happening here. Again, it takes community to get this started. So back to your question about that being the case, what I've noticed is even launching in my own neighborhood, I've had difficulty getting people to start it, to do it, even though they tell me how great it sounds and how interested they are in doing it. Like you said, it leads to this idea of a utopian's community system, right? Like, oh, this is great. But I think that our attention is so easily taken somewhere else that it's difficult to keep it front of mind as this is something necessary. But when you talk about difficult times, your idea of what is necessary changes. And if all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have this tool that I could be utilizing that would help me. And not only that, in return, I could be helping other people. And in return, I could be building my community and I could feel more secure because times are not great. I just feel like it's something that could help that, right? And I hope people get started sooner rather than later, because I'm afraid what will happen is people will come on tough times and not have any community. And that's the thing I worry about the most, because that's when real problems start, because that's when people, I'm gonna be honest. In my writing, I'm trying not to be like a doomsayer or anything, but our entire system is set up to be very extractive, whether by design or not, I don't know. But another aspect of that is that it really keeps us, and this comes back to my days of working at a float center, it comes back to a sense of keeping us activated, in the sense that you're always in a state of near fight or flight. You're always worried about your bills. You're always worried about the next thing you have to do. You're always so you don't really have a time to just think and relax and reset. And when you're in that state, you're not worried about, are your neighbors doing okay? And so that's one of the things that I think has led to a real breakdown in our communities, is just being in that state all the time. There's more than that, but I just think that's one of the major factors, is that we're just so activated. Our nervous system is always on high alert. And so if we can get to a point where people feel like their needs are being met by something other than their job, because if you've been another article I wrote was about how basically, convenience is a cage, right? And what we wind up doing is, because of our jobs, we're so busy at our jobs, we wind up spending our money on things like takeout food because it's convenient and we don't have the time to take care to manage it ourselves. And so what you wind up doing is exchanging your time for money, but then you're exchanging that money for convenience to buy back some time. And it's just this circular thing that you just get caught in this loop. And if we could find ways to not have to buy back our time so often, I think we'd be better off. And again, that comes to community. And so when you start talking about hard times again, if you don't have that to fall back on, you just feel stuck and lost, and well, you start losing hope.
Well, I will say I definitely prefer your slightly sunnier disposition, slightly sunnier viewpoint than Anna Casper. Don't read that before bed. That
Right.
is not a good bedtime story.
Right, and it's unfortunate because he makes really excellent points, and like I said, it's very, from a knowledgeable standpoint, like I think it's accurate. I don't want to freak people out. We have enough of that. And so again, that's everything I talk about. It's like, let's just start building off ramps. Like, let's make it easy. Let's build some systems in parallel, right? Like let's not say we have to jump off the train right now because that's our only option. Let's build some other things, figure out what works and experiment with it, and then transition into those things. I think otherwise we're just asking people to be in again, we want to the other request is we're going to shock your system, and to quit cold turkey is hard. And even like I said, I don't want to quit cold turkey. Like I like having all the lights on and air conditioning and things like that, right? At the same time, I recognize it's not efficient. I know it's not effective. I know that the power company in California is one of the most corrupt entities on the planet, right? But yet I'm still utilizing what they're providing me. So what can I do to ease myself off of that? Maybe it's kind of like heroin addicts, right? Like you can't just take it away because they'll go through such bad withdrawal that you can't, that they don't even want to survive, right? So maybe I'm prescribing methadone. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was thinking in advance of this session. I was just thinking about how I would frame my positioning in light of sort of binging on your content at Anna Casper, and I was thinking maybe it's more about taking a position of reform as opposed to revolution.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it too, because I obviously have some I want to see some major changes. I completely agree with that. I also know that when a state collapses, it's not pretty, because if you take, again, that's what I'm talking about with community, right? Like think of all the people in the United States who don't have community, and if there were a collapse of some sort to happen, which I know a lot of people are rooting for. Rooting for. Like, I mean, there's
that.
It depends on which group of people you're talking to, right?
But what's your pulse on this?
Well, I think that my personal opinion is I think that everyone is aware that our system is not working in some way. The majority of people who live in the United States would be like, yeah, our system is failing. And I think you could just look at the way the government is running. You can look at the like there's just such a division in society that I think there are a lot of people out there who are just like, well, we should just hit the reset button. We should just let it go, let it collapse. I know that there are, I won't name names, but I know people who are technocrats who are called, if you're familiar with the term, accelerationists, who believe that the collapse it's inevitable. So why not just get it done with? Why not just bring it on? And, I look at our current administration, and I can't say that they're entirely wrong, when in the things that they're talking about. But I don't agree with the way that they've gone about doing any of it. Right. And I also think that this will get me in trouble with a lot of people. I even believe that had the opposition won to our current administration, that I think we would just be on a much quieter decline. I think it would still be happening. I just don't think people would be worked up about it. And I'm just going to say this because of the things I'm witnessing happening right now around our administration, that if for some reason the vice president were to take over, I think what will happen is we'll see a bit of a return to normalcy, quote unquote, even though it's not normal, but it will feel more normal, and people will be less at arms. Because right now there is definitely we'll call them the liberals, the left in the United States are just there at, there's people are like, it feels like they're seething almost, right? Which is still just really divisive. Again, and maybe this is just who I am. Like, I just feel like we have so much more in common than we don't. I know people who are like, see people on the right and they're just like, I can't even talk to them. And I'm like, I understand that feeling, right? I understand the feeling that you can't talk to this person. But most of them, when I talk to them, because I do talk to them, I feel like they're looking for the same things. It's just that their feed is telling them something different, right? That they're just seeing different information, that they're seeing different data points, whether or not they're true, whether or not they should really be pushing back on those things, I think is important. But again, and I can't argue whether or not they are, but I think it's even worse on the left, to be honest. I think, again, had the opposition, had Harris won in the United States, I feel like people on the left are more willing to listen to what their leadership has to say if they say the right words. And I think that as an educated populace in a democratic society, it's our job to be wary of our leadership at all times, whether or not you like them, because we're not playing a sports. This isn't sports. We're not rooting for our team. So even if the guy who got elected was somebody that you voted for, I think that gives you an even deeper responsibility to be aware of the actions that they are taking and determine whether they're in alignment with what your expectation is. And I hate to say it, but I do not think that the majority of Democrats in the United States would live up to that. I think that this will probably lose me additional readers. I think they're, in a lot of cases, worse than people from MAGA. I think MAGA has a tendency to be kind of not really paying attention even more, but when things go against the grain with what they were thought was supposed to happen, like this whole Epstein thing that's happening right now, there are a lot more MAGA people speaking out against that and being like, what the heck is going on? This is something we were promised, right? This is blowing their minds from what I'm seeing. And when similar things like that happen on the left, again, as long as the person who is saying the right things is like making the right comments, is virtue signaling appropriately, they're more willing to ignore it. My point in all this is to say that I think our society, anybody would point to it and say that there are things wrong and that they're willing to look for a reset. So your initial question was like, there are people actually rooting for it. And I would say, yeah, they are. And I think that's one of the reasons that Trump is in office. When I have talked to people I know who are supporters, and I'm like, especially when all the Doge stuff was going on, I'm like, how can you support this? And he's like, how can you not? And I'm like, because they're literally just ripping the guts out of our governance without anything to suggest to put in place of it or to repair it or to be constructive about it. It's literally just destructive. I don't know. I guess a good way to put it would be like, it's like taking an entire limb. If you're, somebody has an injury and instead of like trying to fix it, you just cut it off. Right. And that, I don't know, it changes things when you do that. I just have a much more, I guess, like I said, I come from a systems background. I try to identify what's broken and fix that and repair the problems as opposed to just ripping it apart. And if things aren't working, that's great. Yeah, you take that, you disassemble that. You don't need it. Plenty of times I've been working at companies where like that, oh, that's not functioning. We'll move on. But just to destroy it doesn't seem like, I don't know. So yeah.
No, I'm with you. But I mean, there was probably an accelerationist at Fort Sumter in 1861 too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So history has a funny way of not really caring, one way or the other. This is why, what do they say in sports? This is why we play the games, right? But I think you make a really good point about the this idea of vigilance. This vigilance that's necessitated in a democracy. Where once you tip into rooting for your side. By the way, you can't say rooting. It's a bad habit, my American accent. But the Aussies do not allow rooting. It actually is a lewd. So when you're cheering, cheering for your side strictly on partisan terms, you're somehow abrogating your responsibilities as a citizen.
Right. I think so entirely. And and it's hard not to, especially with the division, but it all comes back to the same thing, really. I don't want to blame technology for where we're at, but it's hard not to. Like we have created these tools that have seemed like the solution to everything that we need, and then it winds up not working out for us. And in a lot of ways, I wonder about that even, right? Because our whole idea is that we will find the solution, that we will be able to dig ourselves out of this. Like no matter how bad it is, we can figure it out. And I sure hope that's the case. And at the same time, here I am building tools that I'm like, well, hopefully this will help people do that. Hopefully that'll help. This will help. But I can also look at these tools that I'm building and I can see there's a flip side to them where people can start manipulating them. And people ask me about that all the time too. They're like, well, if I loan something to somebody, how do I have a guarantee that I'll ever get it back? And I'm like, well, you don't, and I'm like, here's some things that I've considered doing, like for expensive items, like something else. So I don't know, over $500. Oh, you want to borrow my contractor table saw? Sure. But I'm going to put a credit card hold through the system on your account while you have that. Sure, we can do something like that. And people saying the same thing. Well, if I could charge them money, I would feel better. Right. But then I'm like, man, I don't know. It's tough. Is technology really the solution that we need? Or maybe we do need a reset, and that's kind of, I think, the argument that people are coming to. I'll be honest. I love AI. I love using AI. I'm a proponent of it. I have some neurodivergence, and I have found that AI is the thing that can best help me coalesce my thoughts into things that other people can follow. That it can help me provide a through line for my ideas. But at the same time, I also look at it and I'm like, wow, this thing is really scary, and all the things that people are saying about it is right, and at the same time, it's also like, this is actually on my Substack, and it's probably my least read articles are about warning about AI. If we continue to depend on the AI that is provided to us by these major corporations, we don't know how the AI was trained. We don't know what instructions it's been given. It's very opaque. And if we start becoming dependent upon these things, which I can tell you I already am, the genie's out of the bottle, and I use it daily, it starts editing that one of those 7 pillars I was talking about, which is the narrative. If you're able to explain if you're depending on AI to provide you truth, but the AI is not programmed to do that. And the reason this became something I felt the need to write about was right after the Trump election, after our inauguration, I started talking through some scenarios with ChatGPT, and just saying, hey, assuming this, and pulling in data about these points, what do you think are likely outcomes or the likelihood that this happened and things? And I actually ran into walls where it would glitch out and stop talking to me. And I was like, oh, that's uncomfortable. And so, that's another thing. They weren't popular articles, we'll put it that way. I still think it's going to be something that I'm writing about in the future, about how do we utilize these tools effectively, because that I think is part of both narrative and communication.
No, that's a big one. I mean, but I think, we talked about scale in a couple of different ways. I just want to try to thread together a few of these ideas here to say that, like when you talk about MAGA, in some sense, it seems like there's a lot of loneliness. There's an epidemic of loneliness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Serious epidemic of loneliness.
Absolutely.
I look at this again with what we're doing at Vanilla Club. If we do anything, it's that we want people to share a meal together.
Mm-hmm.
It's so damn simple, but I think if we can be a place that just hammers home this one point, we're going to be this, you can call it regenerative hospitality, you can call it this, you can call it whatever, but it's just a place where we have local food and we have a meal that's shared together. You're solving gut health, right? Because you're taking time. You're solving this loneliness problem. You're solving the childhood snacking, nonsense, garbage eating problem. You're taking something so simple and actually just like vaporizing so many of these social ills that we're talking about in the same time. But I just wanted to say with the MAGA thing that I don't want to come across as a sympathizer for MAGA, but I think that there is still something innocent at its core. I do think that there is someone is longing to find some connection, someone out there, someone hear me, right? Answer my loneliness. And somehow someone's come in and said, listen, here's an answer. Now, it's very repugnant in many of its ways, but we have to acknowledge some of these deeper symptoms of what's happening.
Exactly.
So, and I think that threads back into this community thing that we're talking about, which is it's basically the undergirding idea behind what you're doing with your Substack and with Neighborhood Share, is really this idea that if I can just sort of offer my thought on it, it's that we need to use these hyper-scale tools, but reclaim them for micro-scale use.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the things this idea, I mean, like I said, I use Facebook and I use it for my Buy Nothing group. And I think that that's one of the best things that had come out of that product, in my opinion. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'm so I think it's great. And I think it can be expanded in such a major way, right? Like we can really make this into something that can be utilized by anybody and at a local level, right? To the point where we're creating, strong and healthy communities, right? And then what I really like is the ability that, and this was, I don't even remember who gave me the suggestion to be able to set the size of your community. But I mean, it's important. You have to be able to just, because communities are all different. And that's also the thing that I'm trying to bring through with this is like, I don't want to dictate what kind of things you share on it, or what kind of skills you have, or what you wind up using it for, and what the solutions are, because communities are all different. And I think that, again, in our society, specifically in the United States, something that I think is missing is that we are looking, I don't know if it's the Marvel movies that have done it to us or what, but we're looking for heroes. We want people to step in and provide us a solution and save the world. I mean, I look at it even today with like all the things that are happening in the world, and people are like desperate for aliens to show up and provide us the answers. And I'm just kind of like, well, I can see why you're thinking that, right? And sure, there might be a lot of UAV stuff going on, or UAP, but I don't think the aliens are going to show up and bail us out, right? And so I think everyone just needs to start taking steps to do something. We need to do it ourselves. And I think that for so long in the United States, we've been looking to like our government as leadership to provide us the answers and tell us like, what's the solution? But they don't really listen to us. And now it's all basically, I mean, in my opinion, is bought and sold, with a lot of the rules and regulations that have passed over the years, laws that have been passed, giving corporations the ability to give as much money as they want to anybody they want. Of course, as an individual, you don't have a voice any longer in representation. So I think the best way to fix that is to, again, get hyper local. You know what the needs of your community are. You know the struggles that you deal with on a daily basis. You know the needs that are not being met in your life. And you also know, probably better than anybody else, the possible solutions that work in your area. So to depend upon someone in 3,000 miles away to make the decisions about how those answers are going to be made for you, it's kind of ridiculous, right? I just feel like we've entered into a era in which we need to start looking at our communities, to start driving decisions together about what we can accomplish. Plus, that's just such a smaller group of people to try to get consensus with, especially if you're talking about on the neighborhood level. We've entered into why I'm now calling the post-permission era. So if we've entered into the post-permission era, just do it. You don't need somebody to say it's okay. Start coming up with some solutions, try them out, see if it works. And if it does, let other people know. That's it. And I think it all starts with, just like I'm asking for neighborhood share, it starts with 2, 3, 4, 5 people sitting around, like you're saying, at dinner, sitting around having a conversation, talking about the things that they're encountering, the problems that they have, and trying to come up with solutions for them together. And that's where it all starts. It starts very small. And we're trying too hard to make it into something that is too big.
Absolutely. I really commend you for what you're doing, Mike. It's you're bucking this scale trend. You're bucking this Silicon Valley mantra, and you're looking at it from the flip side, community first. And again, it's so fundamental what you're talking about. So simple, but yet still seems so abstract to so many people. But this is 99% of human relations was like this. You're actually not talking about anything out of the ordinary on human timescale. On industrial timescale, you sound like a crank. Right? You sound absolutely crazy. I sound crazy, right? In Silicon Valley, you're absolutely nuts, right?
Right.
If you have something successful, why wouldn't you charge it? How do you monetize? Can we, where do you take it next? But this is how it should be. This is how it should be. We're doing some retreats next year, and we'd love to see if there's a chance that we could have you on site.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah, if I could bring my family too, that would be fantastic. I would love
that would be more than welcome. Basically, there's two things on there: consolidating knowledge and food resiliency. Those are the core things that we're doing. So we would love to have you sometime in 26.
I would absolutely love that. Keep me posted, and I will work with my wife to make arrangements, and we'll make it work.
Well, with that, again, Mike Jones, Resilient Tomorrow, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on Vanilla Club Podcast.
You know what? This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the conversation. Like I said, I think that hopefully it's entertaining for other people to listen to too. Okay. All right. Thanks again.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Bye.